Watch This Week in Missouri Politics, Sunday mornings at 11 on ABC 30.
And welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. This week we're going to jump right in to our interview because we have one of the most active senators in the entire state joining us. Senator Mike Kehoe, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
Speaking of being active, you're in Senate leadership, and you guys have actually started churning out bills already. Can you give us an update on the first few weeks in the Senate?
Yeah, I think we've had a very productive first few weeks. Some of our priority bills, ethics legislation, municipal court reform, those have all kind of worked their way through the Senate. We've been in the middle of several other conversations that we're trying to move some legislation that we think will make a difference in Missourians' lives. So Senate leadership and the Senate is working together. You know, the Senate is not as partisan as maybe the House is, and I think you're seeing that in some of the votes come out on some of these bills.
Sometimes the Senate, because of that bipartisan nature, works a little slower. You guys have seemed to turn out legislation this year. Was that a strategy going in, or?
It's, slower is by design. The one thing I really respect and quite honestly like about the Senate is that people have their opportunity to debate, and issues are debated, and items get worked through on the floor. There was a large issue that we just finished up this week with the TANF benefits that Democrats and Republicans worked through various issues to make that program better, not to cut that program, but to redirect resources in areas that's needed for Missouri's working poor across the state. And it was an interesting process to watch. It took about 2.5 days, but at the end of the day, we worked through it, and I think a pretty good product will come out of it.
One of the things you've been very active in, of course, your background is being an auto dealer. Right. Anybody in Jeff City knows Mike Kehoe's name. If they don't know you from the Senate, they know you from being an auto dealer. Walk us through where the issue is with the franchise law right now. What's been happening the last few weeks? Can you explain that to our viewers?
Sure. Missouri since 1980 has had a Missouri franchise law that new and used car dealers have had to follow. It's a state statute established that Department of Revenue would normally enforce. It says if you want to be a car dealer, here's what you have to do. You have to be bonded. You have to have a facility. You have to do these things. And it's really a consumer protection piece. A couple of years ago, a kind of new to the market, new technology, new way to distribute cars, a company called Tesla out of California, came to the market, and they went to Missouri and asked for a dealer's license to be able to sell their cars. They didn't fit any of the parameters under the franchise law, but for some reason, Governor Nixon and the Department of Revenue issued them a dealer license. And what Missouri auto dealers are saying is, well, wait a minute. For the last 40 years, we've complied with the Missouri franchise law. Now there seems to be a new tier developed specifically just for one company, and that's not a level playing field.
Let me ask you a question. I think we all know that auto dealers sponsor little league teams. They're very recognizable in the community. What is the role of an auto dealer from when a car rolls off the assembly line to you buy it? What does that auto dealer do?
Well, sure. The biggest thing is what they offer is that customer service and that interaction with that customer, so that when the customer goes and looks for the car, they have a place to trade a car in. They have a way to test drive a car. They have a way to take delivery of that car where all the features are explained to them. And most importantly, if there should be a problem with that car, or even if they're in an accident or something like that, they have a location to come back to where that person's name is on the building, that person's involved in the community, that person goes to church, plays soccer with their kids. That is somebody that's not going to just go away overnight. They're going to protect their reputation, and in doing so, they're going to make sure that the manufacturer's car that they sold is taken care of to the customer no matter what it takes.
We've had some legislators on this very program, and they've discussed, it's a law that Governors Bond, Ashcroft, Carnahan, Holden all enforced as law. Now you have a Governor Nixon that's taking a different track. Is it not a little bit of a legislative sanctity issue? When you pass a law, don't you believe the governor's going to enforce that law? And if they can pick and choose, what if they don't want to enforce the TANF changes you made? What if they choose not to do it?
Well, this governor has chosen, and it's a matter of fact, there's been many laws that he decides to enforce or not enforce, manipulate, interpret different ways. His Department of Revenue has been incredible in how they've interpreted various tax laws that they try to enforce onto businesses. And sometimes we're having tax audits where we're all of a sudden changing tax policy in the middle of it. So it's not just the franchise piece, to your point, it's multiple different pieces. This administration has chosen to interpret in different ways that are very outside of the box. Let me just say that.
What are some ways, I know you've had Amendment 10 last year, what are some ways you've done as you've been in the Senate to start blocking that and forcing the laws to forcing the governor to enforce the laws as you pass them?
Right. Well, Amendment 10 was a big step. It gives Missourians some protection that any governor, current or future, Democrat or Republican, can't use Missouri's budget to, wage war with different pieces of the Missouri community. I can't withhold on education money just to take those same educators a few months later to work for me and agree to release some of their money to help me fight a certain issue. He's using different groups as political pawns. And what Amendment 10 would say is that the legislature has the right to overturn his decision should he veto or withhold on some of these budget issues.
And I understand you're going to pass the budget earlier this year to try to be able to do that during session.
Right, and that's another protection. And I know later you'll have Ryan Silvey. Senator Silvey knows more about the budget than most people in that building. And on the House side, we have some great budget hawks. They're going to work together to craft the budget earlier so that the governor has the 15 statutory days to review it and then make any vetoes he might make and still give us time to still be in session and maybe correct any actions that the governor tries to withhold on.
Just a couple more quick things on the franchise law. The company Tesla has been the one that did get the dealer license, but I guess the question would be, some folks are trying to pitch it as the state's against anti-innovation. There's some people that don't want to see things progress. Can you address the issue of folks that maybe want to dump on the fact that you're anti-electric car or technology?
Every manufacturer, I'm a little partial to Ford, has electric cars you can go in the showroom and buy today. GM, Ford, Honda, there's all kinds of electric cars. Every dealer in the state of Missouri has a website where you can buy a car over the internet if you want to. So it's not internet shopping, it's not electric cars. It's the fact that there's a standard set to be a franchise dealer, and if you want to follow that dealer, it was established as a piece to protect the consumers back in the 80s. Everybody should be on the same page. And we just think that when Tesla does that, it takes away the spirit of what's been happening here in Missouri. And as we said, those are the local dealers who are protecting the consumers and that you have a face to go to that are going to help you with that vehicle.
Now, speaking of Tesla, did they have a plan to install some of these dealerships and service centers here in Missouri?
Well, they just came out with a report, interestingly enough, the Securities and Exchange Commission report that they filed on their own that in black and white said they have no plans to have service centers in Missouri. They do not have the ability to build service centers near where their customers are buying these cars. So they admit that they're not going to be able to service these vehicles. And I think that, consumers might think they're getting a great deal by buying factory direct, but actually what's happened is consumers paying full list when you buy factory direct. The dealer's the one who makes that price competitive. And then the dealer's the one that's able to follow up should there be a recall. How do we know that a seatbelt malfunction isn't going to happen in a Tesla? It's happened in all manufacturers' cars. It'd be nice to be able to go to your local dealer to have a safety recall done versus putting your car in a flatbed truck and shipping it up to Chicago.
Now, obviously, this has become a thing with some auto dealers versus Tesla, but this is not something, if another car dealer, Tesla is very highly backed by the federal government. What if there's a company that's not as well-heeled as Tesla that comes in the market? Right.
Well, the first, to your second point is, every Tesla you see on the road, $30,000 of taxpayer subsidies went to that car driving down the highway. So when you see one go past, make sure you know you own a piece of that car. It might be the taillight or the roof, but you own something in there. And so it's important to remember that when you talk about that taxpayer subsidies and the things that go along with the cars that Tesla is producing, not everything is above board and on the table.
But take Tesla off this. If this was a different car manufacturer that came in and didn't want to follow this law, would the auto dealers have the same issue? Would you be in the same fight?
Well, that's the larger concern. When you talk about the bigger policy issue, there may be a manufacturer, that we don't even know of right now over in China ready to produce 200,000 cars a year and come over and distribute factory direct without going through the franchise. And I think you start to create a problem there because dealers represent Missouri jobs. There's 20,000 Missourians who work for car dealers across the state. They have a footprint. There's 380 locations. And when you start selling factory direct, you skip all those jobs, and I would argue put a lot of those jobs at jeopardy, and then you put the consumer protection piece at jeopardy as well.
Just to be clear, though, if there was another manufacturer that wasn't Tesla that came in and wanted to sell in Missouri and not abide by this law, would you be opposing that as well?
Absolutely. Well, because we've been abiding by the same franchise law since 1980. So it's not just about Tesla. It's anybody who wants to come and do that. we don't think that's the right way to do it. And it's interesting, the manufacturers, Ford, GM, Chrysler, they're in and we normally don't always agree, the Dealer Association of Manufacturers, they agree with us on this issue because it needs to be a level playing field.
Let's say the Senate and the House pass a piece of legislation that gets rid of it and the governor signs it. You may oppose it, but would you abide by that law when it was passed?
Yeah, if it was a level playing field for everybody, I think Oliver Association would be happy to go along with it.
Skipping to another thing, after you buy the car, you're on the road. You've been a leader in transportation issues. You put forward a plan, you've been known as a doer. The plan didn't work out. Where I think other people now seem to be coming to the realization that we have infrastructure needs in the state. Are you hearing from other folks? Are you hearing people ideas?
Oh yeah, it's a daily conversation for me, and it happens 10 times a day. I put a plan forward because when I ran for office, Missourians, I think, and people across the country are sick of politicians who know there's a touchy issue out there but are afraid to address it because the answer to it may not be popular. And the answer to fixing transportation funding is probably not the most popular thing, especially for a conservative Republican to talk about. But people don't want elected officials to just duck on these things. We've got to get the tough issues out on the table and see how we can move forward. Missouri's transportation system at 34,000 miles of roads and 10,400 bridges is the 7th largest in the country, but our funding is the 43rd in the country. So that recipe does not work to keep our roads and bridges maintained and safe for our families to what Missourians deserve. And we have to figure out a way to put funding into that system. This is a department that is not just has an insatiable appetite like some government entities. This is a Department of Transportation's funding has gone down by 75% in the last 8 years due to decreased revenues from gas taxes, due to decreased revenues from the federal government. The National Federal Trust Fund is broke, and so Missouri is not getting its share of those dollars anymore. And going forward, it's getting very scary to try to keep the program intact.
Well, with roads, you're actually building something too. You create a job to build that road, and then when you're done, something's there the public can use.
Well, the job, Amendment 7, obviously was not well liked by Missourians and all, but it would have created over 10,000 jobs a year for 10 years for highway construction projects around. And to your point, that is an asset then is owned by the state. It's something you can touch and feel, and it's there. And I think that's important for Missourians to know that when we come up find a solution to fund transportation, and we will, these are to build assets the Missourians will own and the state will be able to have.
Last topic, looking at 2016. The Republican Lincoln days are next weekend. The party's in a form of change. When you look at the governor's race and the state ticket, are you happy? Are you pleased? Do you think it's set yet? Do you think they can compete? The Democrats traditionally win a lot of these statewide races. Is the Republican Party getting their house in order to compete?
Well, I think there's a lot of moving pieces, and you're seeing a lot of people positioned for different seats in the statewide ticket, and I believe the Republican Party will be ready. I think that Missourians connect with the message that we carry with, better tax policies and more conservative Missouri traditional values, and I believe we will be ready, but like anything, it's a process. And we're in the beginning part of that process, so I think you'll see the deck chairs get reshuffled quite a bit.
Speaking of the deck chairs being reshuffled, you've been mentioned from everything as a potential gubernatorial candidate, Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor. If you had to make a decision today, are you leaning towards something? Are you in a consideration process?
Well, my wife just wants me out of the house, so that's the first step. But, I'm a doors open kind of guy. If I see that there's a door open and it makes sense for my family and for the citizens, I'll take a look at it. But it's not something that I just dream about every day running statewide, because it's an effort. You've got to go out and, work hard to earn Missourians' trust. I think I could do that. And so as that shuffling goes forward, we'll keep an eye on what might make sense. And at the end of the day, if none of them do, I'm fine with that too.
But the door's not closed.
The door is definitely not closed.
Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.